In a mansion where luxury hides secrets, a quiet maid sees more than meets the eye. A seductive woman wins over the air, but hides a plan calculated with cold precision. As the matriarch mysteriously falls ill, dark alliances form in the shadows. Only one invisible witness dares to face the evil and change everyone's fate. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The Campbell mansion stood imposingly on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, its high walls and impeccable gardens looking more like works of art than simple landscaping. It was one of those residences that made any passerby slow their pace on the sidewalk, if only for a second, just to admire the wrought-iron gate and imagine what life was like on the other side of those walls. There everything breathed elegance, tradition, and a kind of money that spanned generations without ever showing signs of running out. Inside that fortress of marble and crystal, Helen Miller went about her routine with the precision of someone who knew every corner, every object, every habit of its residents. At 42, her face bore the marks of a life dedicated to domestic work, but her brown eyes held a spark that showed she had never lost her ability to observe the world with keen attention. Short, with black hair always tied back in a discreet bun, she wore her navy blue uniform with the same care she applied to every task, as if every detail mattered, as if every gesture was part of something bigger. Helen wasn't just another employee in that house. She had been there for 12 years, long enough to have seen Ethan Campbell grow from an ambitious 30-year-old businessman into a man of 42, successful in his career but visibly lonely at heart. She had witnessed his wife's departure, who one day simply decided she preferred life in Paris to the routine of New York City, leaving behind a man who never knew how to show his feelings and a mother-in-law who had always been more of a mother to her than her own family. The matriarch of the house was Cecilia, a 76-year-old woman who carried elegance in her gestures and a quiet wisdom in her eyes. Her white hair was impeccably styled, her posture erect despite the weight of her age, and her soft voice knew exactly when to assert itself. Cecilia was the kind of woman who didn't need to shout to be heard. A single look from her was enough to convey volumes of feelings, approvals or disapprovals. And Helen had learned over the years to read each of those looks as if deciphering a precious book. The housekeeper was finishing tidying up the living room on that March afternoon when she heard Ethan arrive. He walked through the front door with an expression that had become familiar in recent months, a mixture of exhaustion and emptiness. The import-export company he ran was doing very well. The numbers didn't lie, but financial success seemed incapable of filling the hole that grew inside him with each passing day. Ethan Campbell was an athletic man with dark hair starting to grey at the temples and green eyes that could have been charming if they didn't carry so much weight. He wore impeccable suits, drove imported cars, frequented the best restaurants in the city, but came home every night to a solitary dinner with his mother, followed by hours in front of the computer in his office. "Good afternoon, Mr. Campbell," Helen greeted, as she did every day. "Good afternoon, Helen," he replied, already loosening his tie. "Is my mother home?" "Mrs. Campbell is in the sunroom, sir. She asked me to prepare tea at 5 o'clock. Ethan nodded and headed toward the back of the house, where Cecilia cultivated her orchids with the same care she dedicated to her family. Helen returned to her routine, but not before noticing something different in his expression. There was a lightness that hadn't been there that morning. Something had happened. 2 days later, the answer came. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," Ethan announced during dinner, with a smile Cecilia hadn't seen on her son's face in years. The matriarch looked up from her plate, studying her son with the kind of attention only mothers possess. "Meet someone? Who, dear?" "A woman, Mom, someone special. I met her at the New York Presbyterian charity event last week. Her name is Larissa." Cecilia slowly set down her silverware, her delicate hands folded on the table. "And what does this Larissa do?" "She's a nurse. She works with the elderly. She was a volunteer at the event. We talked all night. She's different, Mom. Simple, humble, down to earth. She doesn't care about money or status. She just wants to do good." The words tumbled out of Ethan with a teenage excitement, as if he had discovered a hidden treasure. Cecilia just nodded, but her eyes narrowed slightly, an almost imperceptible gesture that didn't escape Helen, who was serving the second course. "That's wonderful, dear. When will I meet her?" "Tomorrow night, if you're free. I invited her for dinner here." Cecilia smiled, but it was a polite, measured smile. "Of course. It will be a pleasure." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Helen passed by the hallway and saw the light still on in Mrs. Campbell's room. She knocked softly on the door. "Come in, Helen." The housekeeper pushed the door open and found the elderly woman sitting in the armchair by the window, looking out at the garden illuminated by lamp-posts. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mrs. Campbell. I just came to see if you needed anything before you go to sleep." Cecilia turned to her, and for the first time in a long while, Helen saw worry in those serene eyes. "Sit here for a moment, dear." Helen sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped in her lap. "You're worried about this woman, aren't you?" Cecilia sighed. "My son is lonely, Helen. He wants so badly to believe he's found someone genuine that he's blind to any warning signs. A volunteer nurse at a charity event. Humble, simple, doesn't care about money. It sounds care. Too perfect, don't you think?" "Sometimes people are exactly what they seem, Mrs. Campbell. Sometimes, yes, but not always. And a mother knows when something isn't right. Tomorrow I'll meet her. Then I'll know." The next evening, Larissa Hayes walked through the mansion's gate like a gentle spring breeze. She was about 35, with straight brown hair falling to her shoulders and almond-shaped eyes that conveyed a studied sweetness. She wore a simple navy blue dress, without any ostentation, with only a discreet pearl necklace that seemed to be her only concession to the formality of the dinner. In her hands, she carried a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Good evening," she said with a shy smile when Ethan introduced her to Cecilia. "You must be Mrs. Campbell. Ethan has told me so much about you. I brought these flowers. I hope you like them. I know they can't compare to your orchids, but they're from the heart." Cecilia accepted the flowers with a polite smile. "How very kind, dear. Welcome." During dinner, Larissa was a perfect hostess of charm. She asked about Cecilia's orchids with genuine interest, complimented the house's decor without exaggeration, told touching stories about her work with the elderly, and mentioned that she had grown up in Yonkers, raised by a humble grandmother after her parents passed away when she was little. She spoke of her struggles, of how she had studied at night to get her nursing degree, of how each patient was like family to her. Ethan drank in every word like a man finding water in the desert. Cecilia listened politely, but Helen, who was serving the table, noticed the small details that the matriarch also caught. The way Larissa's eyes scanned the paintings on the walls, the decorative pieces, the antique silverware. The way her gaze lingered a second too long on the French wall clock, the Chinese porcelain, the Czech crystal. "What a beautiful home," Larissa commented at one point. "It must be so wonderful to have a home with so much history, so much tradition. I imagine every object here holds a memory, doesn't it, Mrs. Campbell?" "Yes, everyone," Cecilia replied, taking a sip of wine. "This house has been in the family for 3 generations. My husband made a point of preserving every piece, every memory. He used to say that a house without history is just a building." "What?" "A beautiful philosophy," Larissa said with a dreamy sigh. "Ethan told me your husband was an admirable man." "He was, to his last days." Larissa lowered her eyes, as if to show respect for the loss. "It must be so comforting to have someone like Ethan by your side now. Such a present, dedicated son." Cecilia studied the young woman for a long moment before answering. "Yes, my son is everything to me." The dinner continued with light conversation, but when Larissa said her goodbyes, respectfully kissing Cecilia's hand and thanking her for the hospitality, the matriarch remained silent for long minutes in the living room. "So, Mom," Ethan asked, his eyes shining with hope, "what did you think?" "She's polite," Cecilia answered, choosing her words carefully. "That's it?" "Ethan, you just met her. It's barely been a week." "I know, Mom, but I've already felt something with her that I haven't felt in years. Like I've finally found someone who sees me, not just what I own." Cecilia touched her son's face tenderly. "Just be careful, my love. A lonely heart can see what it wants to see, not necessarily what's in front of it. Mom, you're being unfair. Give her a chance, please. Cecilia sighed. All right, I will. But that night, when Helen went to the matriarch's room to collect the teacups, she found her still awake, looking out the window. Helen, she said without turning, her eyes fixed on the dark garden, I want you to pay very close attention to everything that happens in this house from now on, every visit from this woman, every gesture, every word. You have a keen eye. Use it. You think there's something wrong? Cecilia finally turned, and her eyes held a certainty that sent a chill down Helen's spine. I don't think, Helen, I know. That woman is not what she appears to be. She rehearsed every answer, every expression. Her eyes scanned this house like someone taking inventory, and when I spoke of my husband, she didn't show genuine compassion. She showed interest in knowing if I was alone, vulnerable. But Mr. Campbell is so happy. That's precisely why I need to be sure before I say anything to him. If I'm wrong, I'll hurt him for no reason. If I'm right and I accuse her without proof, he'll defend her and push me away. I need time. And I need your eyes. Helen nodded, feeling the weight of that responsibility. You can count on me, Mrs. Campbell. The following weeks brought a palpable change to the mansion. Larissa became a constant presence, always with the perfect excuse to show up. She brought lunches she claimed to have prepared with love, though Helen noticed the containers came from expensive local restaurants. She offered to keep Cecilia company while Ethan worked, insisting she loved talking to older people, that they had so much wisdom to share. Cecilia accepted the company with courtesy, but Helen saw the tension in the matriarch's shoulders whenever Larissa arrived, and she, true to Cecilia's request, observed everything. One day Helen entered the library to clean and found Larissa alone, flipping through a family record book that was kept on the highest shelf. The woman started when she saw the housekeeper. Oh, Helen, you startled me. I was just admiring the books. Ethan told me I could make myself at home. Of course, Helen replied, keeping her tone neutral. That's the family record book. It has photos and stories from several generations. How interesting, Larissa said, putting the book back, but not before Helen noticed. She was on the page listing the family's assets and properties. Ethan must be so proud of all this history. He certainly is. Larissa moved closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. You know, Helen, you've been in this house for so long. You must know every secret, every story. Mrs. Campbell trusts you a lot, doesn't she? I try to do my job to the best of my ability. I'm sure. A loyal employee is worth their weight in gold. Ethan mentioned you're practically part of the family. It must be comforting to have that stability, that safe place. Helen felt a growing unease. There was something in the way Larissa spoke, as if she were probing, testing loyalties. I'm grateful to work here, yes. Of course. And I bet you'd do anything to protect this family, wouldn't you? After all, it's your job, your livelihood. I'd do anything that was right, Helen replied, looking the woman straight in the eye. The two sized each other up for a moment, and Helen was certain that Larissa had just assessed whether she would be an ally or an obstacle. The answer was clear in the cold eyes that, for a second, replaced the sweet gaze Larissa so carefully cultivated. Good, Larissa said, her smile returning. Then we're allies. After all, we all want what's best for Ethan, don't we? Before Helen could answer, Ethan entered the library. Larissa, I was looking for you. Want to take a walk in the garden? I'd love to, she replied, instantly transforming back into the sweet, adoring girlfriend. Helen, it was great talking to you. When the two left, Helen stood still, her heart racing. She had to tell Cecilia about that conversation. It had been a veiled threat, she was sure of it. That night in the matriarch's room, Helen recounted every word. Cecilia listened in silence, her hands folded in her lap. She's mapping the house, analyzing who's an ally and who could be a problem, Cecilia said when Helen finished. This confirms my suspicions, but it's still not enough. We need more. What do you want me to do? Keep watching and be careful, Helen. If she realizes you're onto her, she might try something. People like her are dangerous when they feel cornered. 2 days later, Helen was in the garden hanging laundry when she heard voices, coming from the small gazebo out back. She immediately recognized Larissa's voice, but there was another male voice she didn't place at first. Moving silently, she got close enough to listen, hidden behind the azaleas. "You need to be patient," Larissa was saying. "These things take time." "Time? It's been almost 2 months. When are we going to see some results?" the male voice replied, and Helen finally recognized it. It was Ryan, the family's driver. Ryan was 28 and had been hired 6 months ago. He was an ordinary-looking young man with short hair, always clean-shaven, who performed his duties efficiently, but kept his distance from the other staff. Helen rarely interacted with him, but she had always thought there was something resentful in his eyes. "I said patience," Larissa repeated, her tone irritated. "First, I need to completely win his trust, then comes the rest." And the old lady? She's still watching everything. "Cecilia is going to be a problem," Larissa admitted. "She doesn't trust me. But Ethan doesn't listen to his mother when it comes to me. He's blinded by love, that gives us an advantage. And how long until we get what we want? Months, maybe, but it'll be worth it. This house, these assets, all of it will be ours. We just need to be smart and patient." Helen's heart pounded. She was hearing exactly what Cecilia had feared, confirmation that Larissa had ulterior motives, and worse, Ryan was involved. She had to get out of there before they found her. Moving with extreme care, Helen backed away, but as she took the final step, her foot landed on a dry twig. The snap echoed like a gunshot in the quiet garden. "What was that?" Ryan asked, and Helen heard quick footsteps coming in her direction. She ran behind the house, her heart hammering in her chest, and slipped in through the kitchen door. Maria, the cook, looked up in surprise. "Everything okay, Helen? You're pale." "Everything's fine," she replied, trying to catch her breath. "Just came to get a glass of water." But her hands were shaking as she picked up the glass, and she knew she couldn't wait any longer. Cecilia needed to know. And she needed to know now. That night, after everyone in the mansion was asleep, Helen climbed the stairs to Mrs. Campbell's room, her steps so light that not even the old wooden floorboards creaked beneath her feet. She knocked on the door 3 times, the silent code they had established for urgent conversations. "Come in, Helen," Cecilia said, closing the book she was holding. Her voice was calm, but her eyes revealed that she already knew something serious had happened. Helen entered, closed the door carefully, and sat in the armchair next to the bed. For several long minutes, she recounted every word she had heard in the garden, every intonation, every meaningful pause. Cecilia listened in absolute silence, her hands folded in her lap, her expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When Helen finished, the silence that filled the room was thick, almost palpable. Cecilia rose slowly, as if every movement required immense effort, and walked to the window. For a long time, she just watched the garden below, illuminated by the lampposts that cast dancing shadows among the trees. "So it's true," she said at last, her voice low but firm. "It wasn't just the suspicions of a jealous mother. It wasn't the paranoia of an old woman who doesn't want to share her son. It was real. She's here to destroy us." "What are we going to do, Mrs. Campbell? We have to tell Mr. Campbell." Cecilia turned slowly, and there was a mixture of sadness and determination in her eyes that Helen had never seen before. "We can't. Not yet. Think about it, Helen. My son is so emotionally involved with this woman that any accusation from us will sound like jealousy, like resistance to his happiness. He'll push us away and become even more vulnerable to her. But we can't just let her go on with this plan. We won't. But we have to be smart. Smarter than her. We need concrete, irrefutable proof, something Ethan can't ignore or try to justify. A half-heard conversation won't be enough. She'll deny it, invent plausible excuses, say you misunderstood, that she was talking about something else, and Ethan, in his state of blind love, will believe her. Helen felt a painful tightness in her chest. So what do we do? Stand by while she carries out her plan? We keep watching, but now with even more care than before. If she realizes we're suspicious, that we heard something, she might speed up her plans, or even worse, she might harm us in some way to get us out of the way. Helen, you have to promise me something, and it's very important. No matter what happens, Do not confront this woman alone, ever. She's dangerous. People who plan these things with such coldness are capable of anything when they feel threatened. I promise, Mrs. Campbell. Cecilia came closer and held Helen's hands in hers, which were cold despite the warmth of the night. And there's something else. If something happens to me, and I say this very seriously, if I suddenly start feeling unwell, having unexplainable memory lapses, anything that seems strange or out of the ordinary, do you promise you'll get help immediately? Even if I seem confused or say everything's fine, even if I don't recognize that something is wrong myself, do you promise you'll trust your instincts and act? A terrible chill ran down Helen's spine, making her tremble. You think she might try to harm you? You think she'd be capable of that? Cecilia sighed deeply, as if carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Helen, I've lived 76 years in this world. I've known good people and bad people. And that woman downstairs with her fake smile and sweet words is one of the most dangerous people who has ever crossed my path. Yes, I think she's capable of anything to get what she wants. And right now, I am the only real obstacle between her and total control over my son and his fortune. The two remained silent for long moments, the weight of that truth hanging in the air between them. Finally, Helen asked, her voice almost a whisper, "And what if we can't stop her in time?" Cecilia looked out the window once more at the dark garden where it had all begun. "We will, Helen, we have to. Because if we don't, my son will pay a price far too high for believing in the wrong love. And I won't allow that to happen, not while I still have the strength to fight." Helen nodded, feeling a determination grow inside her. She wasn't just an employee in that house. She was part of that family, even if not by blood. And she would protect Cecilia with her own life, if necessary. "Mrs. Campbell," she said, standing up, "you can rest easy tonight. I'll keep watch, and I promise I won't let anything bad happen to you." Cecilia smiled for the first time since the start of that conversation, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, my dear. Thank you for being here. I don't know what I'd do without you." When Helen finally returned to her room at the back of the house, it was well past midnight. She lay down on her bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind spun in circles, replaying every word she'd heard in the garden, every gesture from Larissa, every look exchanged with Ryan. There was a plot being woven in the shadows of that mansion, a plot that threatened to destroy everything that family had built over generations. And she, Helen Miller, a simple housekeeper who had grown up in Newark, New Jersey, and never imagined she would one day be involved in something like this, was now the only person besides Cecilia who knew the truth. It was a terrifying responsibility, but she wouldn't fail. She couldn't fail. In the days that followed, Helen watched everything with even sharper eyes. She noticed how Larissa started arriving earlier and leaving later. She noticed how she began to ask subtle questions about Ethan's routine, his business, trips, the documents he kept in his office. She noticed how Ryan started finding excuses to be around when Larissa was at the house, always with some made-up task that kept him nearby. And she noticed, with a heavy heart, how Ethan was growing more and more in love, more and more blind to the signs that to her and Cecilia were as obvious as the midday sun. One afternoon, while ironing in the laundry room, Helen heard Ethan and Larissa talking in the nearby hallway. Silently, she moved close enough to listen without being seen. "You know I love you, don't you?" Ethan was saying, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine my life without you now." "I love you too, my love," Larissa replied, with that calculated sweetness that made Helen feel sick. "You've completely changed my life. Before I met you, I just lived for my work, for taking care of others. Now for the first time, someone is taking care of me. Someone values me. I'll always value you. And I want to give you everything you deserve, everything you've never had. You don't have to give me anything, Ethan. I just want you. I just want to be by your side." But there was something in the way Larissa said those words that sounded false to Helen's ears. It was like watching a play where an actress recited her lines with technical perfection, but with no real emotion behind them. When the two walked away, Helen returned to her work, her heart heavy. How could Ethan not see it? How could he be so blind to the truth that was right in front of his eyes? But she knew the answer. A lonely heart, starved for love and attention, is capable of believing anything. That fills that void. And Larissa was an expert at identifying that void and filling it with exactly what the person wanted to hear. That evening, during dinner, Helen observed the dynamic at the table. Ethan smiled and chatted animatedly with Larissa, sharing stories from work, making plans for the future. Larissa listened attentively, asked the right questions, laughed at the right times, touched his hand at the right moments. It was a flawless performance. Cecilia, sitting at the head of the table, maintained a polite smile, but Helen saw the tension in her shoulders, saw how her hands gripped the silverware tighter than necessary, saw how she avoided looking directly at Larissa for too long. After dinner, when Ethan and Larissa went to the living room to watch a movie, Helen helped Cecilia up to her room. The elderly woman was visibly tired, the weight of the situation taking its toll. "How much longer can we endure this, Helen?" she asked when they were alone. "How long until he makes an irreversible decision?" Helen had no answer. She just held the woman's hand and stood there in silence, offering the only comfort she could, her presence. And as night fell over the Campbell mansion, as the lights came on one by one in the luxurious rooms, as Ethan dreamed of a happy future with Larissa, 3 people in the house knew the dark truth that hid behind that charming smile. The storm was just beginning, and no one yet knew how devastating it would be. Night fell over the Campbell mansion with a weight Helen had never felt before. Every shadow seemed more menacing, every silence carried a hidden meaning. She waited until the entire house was asleep, until the bedroom lights went out one by one, until only the soft glow of the lamp in Mrs. Campbell's room remained, who always read before sleeping. The housekeeper climbed the stairs with light steps, her heart still racing from the discovery in the garden. She knocked on the door 3 times, the silent code they had established for urgent conversations. "Come in, Helen," Cecilia said, closing the book she was holding. Her voice was calm, but her eyes revealed that she already knew something serious had happened. Helen entered, closed the door carefully, and sat in the armchair next to the bed. For several long minutes, she recounted every word she had heard, every intonation, every meaningful pause. Cecilia listened in silence, her hands folded in her lap, her expression growing darker. When Helen finished, the silence that filled the room was thick, almost palpable. Cecilia rose slowly and walked to the window, observing the garden where everything had been revealed. "So it's true," she said at last, her voice low but firm. "It wasn't just the suspicions of a jealous old woman. It was real. She's here to destroy us." "What are we going to do, Mrs. Campbell? We have to tell Mr. Campbell." Cecilia turned, and there was a determination in her eyes that Helen had never seen before. "We can't. Not yet. My son is so emotionally involved with this woman that any accusation from us will sound like jealousy, like resistance to his happiness. He'll push us away and become even more vulnerable. But we can't just let her continue. We won't. But we have to be smart. We need concrete proof, something Ethan can't ignore or justify. A half-heard conversation won't be enough. She'll deny it, say you misunderstood, and Ethan will believe her." Helen felt a tightness in her chest. "So what do we do?" "We keep watching, but now with more care. If she realizes we're suspicious, she might speed up her plans or, worse, harm us in some way. Helen, you have to promise me something. No matter what happens, do not confront this woman alone. She's dangerous." "I promise, Mrs. Campbell. And there's something else." Cecilia came closer, holding Helen's hands in hers. "If something happens to me, if I suddenly start feeling unwell, having memory lapses, anything that seems strange, do you promise you'll get help? Even if I seem confused or say everything's fine, do you promise you'll trust your instincts?" A chill ran down Helen's spine. "You think she might try to harm you? I think she's capable of anything to get what she wants, and I am the only real obstacle between her and total control over my son." The following weeks were filled with a silent tension that hung over the mansion like a storm about to break. Larissa continued her daily visits, always sweet, always attentive, always with the right word at the right time. Ethan floated on a cloud of happiness, that was painful to watch because Helen knew the truth behind that charming smile. Ryan, the driver, kept a low profile, but Helen began to notice small details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way he and Larissa exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. The moments they disappeared together, always with ready excuses. He was getting something from the car, she was going to the restroom. But Helen knew, she always knew. It was on an April afternoon that everything began to change more concretely. Ethan called the whole family into the living room, including Helen, which was unusual. "I have an announcement to make," he said, holding Larissa's hand, with a radiant smile. "Larissa and I are getting married." The silence that followed was deafening. Cecilia turned visibly pale, her hands gripping the arms of her chair tightly. Helen felt the floor give way beneath her feet. "My son," Cecilia began, her voice trembling slightly. "You've only known each other for 3 months." "I know, Mom. But when you find the right person, you just know. And I know Larissa is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with." Larissa, who had maintained a modest expression until then, allowed herself a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I know it might seem fast, Mrs. Campbell, but I truly love your son, and I'll do everything to make him happy." Cecilia forced a smile, but Helen saw the tears she was fighting to hold back. "Then congratulations to you both. When are you planning to have the wedding?" "In 3 months," Ethan replied. "We want something intimate, just family and close friends. But there's something else, Mom. The company is expanding into Europe. I'll need to be in Germany for 4 months to personally oversee the opening of the new branch. I leave next week." "4 months?" Cecilia repeated, and Helen saw panic briefly cross her face. "I know it's a long time, but it's important for the business, and when I get back, we'll go straight to the wedding." "And Larissa?" Cecilia asked. "Is she going with you?" "No," Ethan replied. "She needs to continue her work here. But I thought it would be a good opportunity for you two to get closer. Larissa will stay here, taking care of you, keeping you company. Isn't that perfect?" The smile Larissa gave Cecilia at that moment made Helen's blood run cold. There was triumph in that smile, a silent certainty of victory. "Perfect," Cecilia said, her voice barely audible. That night, Helen found Cecilia in the sunroom, among her orchids, tears streaming silently down her face. "Mrs. Campbell," Helen whispered, sitting beside her. "She won, Helen, she did it. 4 months. 4 months without my son here to protect me. 4 months alone with her." "You're not alone. I'm here." Cecilia took Helen's hand, squeezing it tightly. "And how long do you think you'll last here after she takes over? How long until she finds a reason to fire you?" "Then what do? We survive," Cecilia replied, wiping her tears. "We're smarter than her, and we wait for the right moment. It will come, Helen. People like her always make mistakes. Always." Ethan's departure was difficult. He hugged his mother for long minutes at the airport, promising to call every day, assuring her he'd be back soon. Cecilia smiled and waved until her son disappeared through the gate, but as soon as he was out of sight, her smile crumbled. Larissa, who had accompanied them, placed a hand on Cecilia's shoulder with studied gentleness. "Don't worry, Mrs. Campbell. I'll take very good care of you while Ethan is away. You won't want for anything." The change was immediate. The day after Ethan left, Larissa arrived at the mansion with suitcases. "Ethan asked me to stay here during his trip," she announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "To keep Mrs. Campbell company and help with whatever is needed." Cecilia said nothing, just nodded, but Helen saw the tension that gripped her shoulders. From that moment on, the house that had always been a haven of peace and order turned into a silent battlefield. Larissa took control with a subtlety that was almost admirable in its cruelty. She began by reorganizing the household routine, always with perfect excuses. Breakfast would now be served later, because it was better for the digestion of elderly people. Cecilia's afternoon tea, which had always been at 5, was moved to 6 because the new time fit better with the house's overall schedule. "Helen, you don't need to serve dinner anymore," Larissa announced one evening. "I'll take care of it myself. After all, I'll soon be the lady of the house. It's good to get used to the responsibilities." "But I've always been the one," Helen began. I know, and you've done a wonderful job all these years, but now it's time for changes. Ethan would want me to take on more responsibilities. I'm sure you understand. Helen looked at Cecilia, who was sitting at the head of the table, and saw the defeat in her eyes. Of course. As you wish. From that day on, Larissa began to personally prepare Cecilia's meals, special teas, nutritious soups, fresh juices, always with a smile, always with an explanation of the benefits of each ingredient. It was Maria, the cook, who first noticed something strange. Helen, she called one morning when they were alone in the kitchen, there's something wrong with the teas that woman prepares for Mrs. Campbell. What do you mean? Maria lowered her voice, looking around to make sure they were alone. Yesterday morning, I saw her put something in the tea, a white powder. When I asked what it was, she said it was a vitamin supplement she got from a compounding pharmacy. But Helen, the way she did it, hidden, quick, like she didn't want anyone to see. Are you sure? I am, and there's more. Mrs. Campbell has been very drowsy lately, more forgetful. Yesterday she asked me 3 times what day it was. Helen's heart raced. How long has this been going on? A week, maybe a little more, since that woman started preparing things for her. Helen felt her legs weaken. It was exactly what Cecilia had feared. Larissa was doing something to her. We need to find out what she's putting in that tea. How? Maria looked around again and whispered, This morning, when she made the tea, I saved a little. It's in a jar at the back of the fridge, hidden behind the vegetables. If you know someone who can analyze it, Helen hugged the cook gratefully. You may have just saved Mrs. Campbell's life, Maria. That afternoon, taking advantage of Larissa's absence to run wedding-related errands, Helen took the jar of tea and went to the neighborhood pharmacy, where she had known the pharmacist, Mr. Davis, for years. Helen, what a surprise, he said with a smile. What brings you here? Mr. Davis, she lowered her voice, I need a favor, and I need this to stay between us. The man's smile vanished when he saw the seriousness on her face. Of course. What do you need? I need you to analyze this, she said, handing him the jar. I need to know if there's any strange substance mixed in. Mr. Davis took the jar, studying the contents. Is this serious? Very. It's a matter of life and death. Can you do it? I can, but it will take a few days. I need to send it to a lab I have a contact with. That's fine. The sooner the better. When Helen returned to the mansion, she found the house in a heavy silence. Larissa hadn't returned yet, but there was something in the air that put her on alert. She hurried up to Cecilia's room and found her lying down, pale, her eyes half closed. Mrs. Campbell, she exclaimed, rushing to the bedside. Are you all right? Cecilia opened her eyes with effort, as if her eyelids weighed a ton. Helen, I'm so tired, so dizzy. What's happening to me? It's her, Mrs. Campbell. It's the tea she prepares. Maria saw her put something in it. I've already taken a sample to be analyzed. Cecilia's eyes widened, and for a moment lucidity returned. You have to be careful, Helen, if she finds out. I will be. But first we need to get you out of here, or at least make her stop preparing your meals. No, Cecilia said with difficulty. If I suddenly refuse, she'll get suspicious. She'll rush whatever she's planning. Continue as we are. But watch everything, and don't leave me alone with her. Helen nodded, swallowing her fear. I promise. In the following days, Helen kept her promise. She never left Cecilia alone for long. She made up excuses to enter the room, to check if everything was okay, to offer help. And she watched Larissa's every move like a hawk watching its prey. It was during one of these vigils that she witnessed something that confirmed her worst suspicions. It was late at night, and everyone should have been asleep. Helen woke to a noise from the hallway. She quietly left her room at the back of the house and saw a light on in Ethan's office. Approaching carefully, she peeked through the crack of the slightly ajar door. Larissa was sitting in Ethan's chair with papers spread across the desk. Documents, contracts, property records. She was photographing each one with her phone. Methodical, organized. Helen was about to retreat when she heard another voice. Find anything? It was Ryan. He entered the office and closed the door, but not completely. Helen could hear every word. "I did. The list of all the assets is here. Stocks, real estate investments. It's more than we imagined. And the will? Haven't found it yet, but it must be around here or maybe in the safe. How are we going to open the safe?" Ryan laughed, a bitter sound. "The old lady will give us the combination, one way or another." "What do you mean?" "You keep doing your work with the T's. When she's confused enough, vulnerable enough, she'll give us everything we need. It's worked before, it'll work again." Helen felt her blood run cold. It's worked before. Those words echoed in her mind like an alarm bell. They had done this before. To other people, other victims, she needed proof, concrete proof, and she needed it fast, because time was running out. The next day, when Larissa left again, Helen went to the room she was occupying. With trembling hands, she searched drawers, closets, suitcases. At the bottom of a suitcase, under neatly folded clothes, she found a locked metal box. Using a bobby pin, she forced the lock until it opened with a click. Inside there were documents, lots of documents, fake IDs with Larissa's photo, but different names, newspaper clippings about elderly people who had left fortunes to caregivers, and a folder with detailed notes on the Campbell family, routines, schedules, assets, properties. Helen photographed everything with an old phone she kept for emergencies, every page, every document, every note. Her hands were shaking so much that some photos came out blurry, but she kept going. This was the proof they needed. She was putting everything back. When she heard Larissa's voice in the hallway, arriving earlier than expected, panic seized Helen. She hastily closed the box, threw it back in the suitcase, and scrambled under the bed, her heart beating so loudly she was sure Larissa would hear it. The door opened, footsteps entered the room. Helen held her breath, watching Larissa's high-heeled shoes move across the floor. She stopped, as if sensing something was different. She walked to the suitcase. Helen closed her eyes, praying silently. If Larissa realized someone had gone through her things, all would be lost. The seconds dragged on like hours. Then, to Helen's immense relief, Larissa moved away from the suitcase and left the room, closing the door behind her. Helen waited long minutes before emerging from her hiding place. Her legs were shaking so much she could barely stand. But she had what she needed. She had the proof. Now she just had to figure out how to use it without putting Cecilia's life in even greater danger. That night, Helen tried to call Ethan in Germany. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. She tried again and again. On the fifth try, he finally answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Helen? What time is it there? Did something happen to my mother?" "Mr. Campbell, she needs you here. I need to tell you some things about Larissa." "Larissa?" Ethan sighed, and Helen heard the irritation in his voice. "Helen, I know it can be hard to accept changes in the house, but Larissa is just trying to help. She calls me every day saying you and my mother are being cold to her, that you won't give her a chance." "It's not that, Mr. Campbell. Please listen to me. She's not who you think she is. She's putting things in Mrs. Campbell's tea. Your mother is getting sick." "Helen, frankly, Larissa is a nurse. She's giving my mother supplements because she needs them. They're vitamins, minerals, things people her age need. They're not just vitamins, Mr. Campbell. She and Ryan are planning something. I heard them talking. They want—" "Enough, Helen?" Ethan's voice cut through the line like a blade. "I don't want to hear any more of this. Larissa warned me you two might invent stories to break us up. I didn't believe it, but it seems she was right. I'm very disappointed in you." "Mr. Campbell, please. No, when I get back, we're going to have a serious talk about your future in this house. Until then, I want you to treat Larissa with the respect she deserves. Good night." And he hung up. Helen stood there with the phone in her hand, tears streaming down her face. Larissa had gotten to him first. She had already planted the seeds of doubt in Ethan's mind, preparing the ground to discredit any accusation. The next morning, Larissa called her into the living room. "I hear you called Ethan last night," she said with a cold smile. "Trying to cause trouble between us?" Helen didn't answer, just held the other woman's gaze. "Let me be clear with you, Helen. You can stay here, do your job, and mind your own business. Or you can continue to be a problem. And problems, I solve. Understood. Understood perfectly. Good, because it would be a shame if something happened to Mrs. Campbell and you were blamed for negligence, wouldn't it? After all, you've been the trusted employee for so many years. If something goes wrong on your watch, who else is Ethan going to blame? The threat was clear. Larissa was building a narrative where if anything happened to Cecilia, Helen would be the one to blame. 2 days later, Mr. Davis called. "Helen, I need to talk to you, in person. It's about the tea analysis." They met at the pharmacy after her shift. Mr. Davis's face was grave. "Helen, what I found in the tea is very serious. There are sedatives mixed in, benzodiazepines in doses that, when accumulated over time, can cause severe mental confusion, memory problems, disorientation. If the person taking this is elderly, the effects are even worse." "I knew it," Helen whispered. "I knew she was doing this. You need to go to the police. This is attempted assault, possibly even worse. With this report, you have proof. But she'll say I was the one who put it there, that I had access to the kitchen, that I wanted to harm Mrs. Campbell to frame Larissa. Then you need more proof. You need to catch her in the act. How?" Mr. Davis thought for a moment. "Do you have a phone with a camera?" "I do. It's old, but it works." "Then record her preparing the tea. Show her putting the powder in. With that and the lab report, you have a solid case." Helen nodded, a new plan forming in her mind. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. You have no idea how much you've helped me." Over the next few days, Helen strategically positioned her phone in the kitchen, hidden among the utensils, with the camera aimed at the counter where Larissa prepared the teas. She tested the angles, made sure the image was clear, that it captured every movement. On the 5th morning, it finally happened. Helen was in the pantry, the door slightly ajar, controlling the phone remotely. Larissa entered the kitchen, checked to see if she was alone, and began to prepare Cecilia's tea. Helen watched everything on the small screen. Larissa's hands picking up the cup, putting in the tea bag, pouring the hot water. And then, looking around one more time, she took a small envelope from her pocket, opened it, and poured the white powder into the tea, stirring it quickly with a spoon. The camera captured everything, every movement, every furtive gesture, every cautious glance around. When Larissa left the kitchen carrying the cup to Cecilia, Helen emerged from the pantry, her legs trembling but her heart relieved. She had the proof. She finally had the proof that no one could deny or explain away. But before she could celebrate, she heard a scream from upstairs. It was Maria's voice, filled with panic. "Helen! Come quick! It's Mrs. Campbell! She's passed out!" Helen ran up the stairs, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst from her chest. She reached Cecilia's room to find the elderly woman collapsed on the floor beside the bed, the broken teacup spilling liquid onto the Persian rug. Maria was kneeling beside her, her hands shaking as she tried to wake her. "Mrs. Campbell..." Helen knelt on the other side, touching the matriarch's pale face. She was cold, her lips slightly blue, her breathing shallow and irregular. She was drinking her tea and suddenly started shaking. Then she just fell. Larissa appeared at the door, her eyes wide in a perfectly rehearsed expression of concern. "Oh my God, what happened?" "She passed out," Helen replied, her eyes fixed on Cecilia. "We need to call an ambulance." Of course. Larissa took out her phone, but Helen noticed her fingers weren't moving with the urgency the situation demanded. There was a studied slowness, as if she were buying time. "Hello, yes, I need an ambulance. A 76-year-old woman has collapsed. The address is Park Avenue, number..." While Larissa was on the phone, Helen picked up the broken cup from the floor. There was still a little liquid at the bottom. Carefully, she poured the contents into a small vial she took from her pocket, stashing it away quickly before anyone noticed. The ambulance arrived in 15 minutes, but to Helen it felt like an eternity. The paramedics quickly examined Cecilia, checked her vital signs, and placed her on a stretcher. "I'm going with her," Larissa announced, grabbing her purse. "Me too," Helen said. "No," Larissa retorted firmly. "Someone needs to stay and look after the house. You stay. I'll go with Mrs. Campbell. After all, I'm a nurse. I can help with her care." Before Helen could protest, Larissa was already inside the ambulance, which sped off with its lights flashing and siren cutting through the quiet Upper East Side morning. Helen stood on the sidewalk, watching the vehicle disappear around the corner. A terrible feeling washed over her, a gut certainty that something awful was happening. Maria came to her side. "What are we going to do now?" Helen turned to the cook, her eyes filled with determination. "You're going to clean Mrs. Campbell's room, but before you do, I want you to collect any leftover tea that's still in there. Anything, and keep it somewhere safe. And you?" "I'm going after them, but first I need to make a call." Helen went to her room and called Mr. Davis. She needed to tell him what had happened, to know if what she had filmed would be enough proof. "Mr. Davis, it's Helen. Mrs. Campbell collapsed. They took her to the hospital." "My God, how is she?" "I don't know, but I got it. I filmed Larissa putting the powder in the tea. It's all recorded on my phone." "Then you have everything you need. The tea analysis, the video, the documents you photographed. Helen, you need to go to the police now." "But what if they don't believe me?" "With this evidence, they'll believe you. But you have to act fast. The more time that passes, the harder it will be to prove everything." Helen took a deep breath. "Okay, I'm going to the precinct now." She grabbed the phone with the recordings, the printed copies of the photos she'd taken, and the lab report, and left. Ryan was outside, cleaning the car, but his eyes followed her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Going out?" he asked. "Yes, I have some business to take care of." "Want me to give you a ride?" "No, thank you. I'll take a cab." The police precinct was a 20-minute drive from the mansion. Helen walked into the grey building and went straight to the front desk. "I need to speak with a detective," she said. "It's urgent." "It's about an attempted poisoning." The officer at the desk looked at her skeptically, but picked up the phone and made a call. Minutes later, a middle-aged man with greying hair and a tired look appeared. "I'm Detective Evans. I was told you have information about a poisoning case." Helen nodded and for the next hour told him everything. From the very beginning, from Cecilia's first suspicions to the video she had captured that morning. The detective listened intently, taking notes, studying the documents she presented. "These fake IDs," he said, picking up the photos Helen had taken of Larissa's. "Documents? I'll need to run these, but if they're real, this woman may have done this before." "That's what I thought. When I heard her and Ryan talking, they said it had worked before." Evans nodded, passing the documents to an assistant. "I want you to check these names in the system, see if there are any reports, complaints, anything." While they waited, the detective watched the video on Helen's phone. His expression grew darker and darker. "This is clear evidence," he said. "With the lab report confirming the presence of sedatives and this video, we have a solid case. Where is the victim now?" "At New York Presbyterian Hospital. She was taken there by the woman who was trying to poison her." Evans's face hardened. "Then we need to move fast. She's alone with the suspect. That's not good." He picked up the phone and made several quick calls. In a few minutes he had organized an operation. One team would go to the hospital to check on Cecilia's condition and ensure her safety. Another team would go to the mansion to question Larissa and Ryan. "You're coming with me," Evans told Helen. "We may need you for a witness identification." On the way to the hospital, the assistant called. "Detective, we found something. 3 of the IDs the woman uses are linked to cases of elderly people who left fortunes to their caregivers. 1 case in Stamford, Connecticut, another in Atlantic City, and a 3rd in Albany. All were closed due to lack of evidence, but the patterns are identical. A caregiver appears out of nowhere, gets close to a wealthy, lonely man, and an elderly family member starts having health problems and ends up isolated." Evans looked at Helen. "You saved that woman's life. If you hadn't acted, she would have been just another victim." When they arrived at the hospital, they found Cecilia in an emergency room, surrounded by doctors and nurses. Larissa was outside in the hallway, wearing an expression of concern that no longer fooled Helen. "How is she?" the detective asked, showing his badge to the doctor leaving the room. "Stable for now, but she had very high levels of benzodiazepines in her blood. If she had arrived any later, it could have been fatal." Evans turned to Larissa. "I need you to come with me to give a statement." "A statement?" Larissa's eyes widened. "About what?" "About the sedatives you were putting in Cecilia Campbell's tea." Larissa's mask fell for a split second, revealing the panic underneath. Then she composed herself. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a nurse. I was taking care of her. We have a video showing you putting substances in the victim's tea. We have a lab report confirming the presence of those substances, and we have witnesses." Larissa looked at Helen, and the hatred in her eyes was palpable. "You," she hissed. "You did this." "I saved Mrs. Campbell's life," Helen corrected, her voice firm. As they took Larissa into custody, Evans turned back to Helen. "Now we need to get her accomplice, Ryan, right?" Helen nodded. But when they arrived at the mansion an hour later, they found the house empty. Ryan had fled. His room was ransacked, clothes scattered, drawers open. He had taken what he could and disappeared. "We'll issue a warrant for his arrest," Evans said. "He won't get far." Helen sat in the living room, finally allowing herself to feel the waves of exhaustion and relief wash over her. It was over. Cecilia was safe. Larissa was arrested. That was all. That mattered. But 2 days later, when Cecilia was discharged from the hospital, something unexpected happened. Ethan returned from Germany ahead of schedule, summoned urgently by Larissa through her lawyer, and his reaction was not what Helen had expected. "You arrested her?" Ethan yelled at the detective in the mansion. "You arrested my fiancée based on what? The word of a housekeeper?" "On the evidence, Mr. Campbell," Evans replied calmly. "A video showing your fiancée putting sedatives in your mother's tea, a lab analysis confirming the presence of those substances, and documents proving she's done this before with other families." Ethan turned to Helen, his eyes filled with anger and pain. "You destroyed my life. You destroyed my chance at happiness." "I saved your mother's life," Helen answered, her voice trembling. "My mother was just weak. Larissa was taking care of her. Those vitamins she was giving her were prescribed." "They weren't vitamins, Ethan," Cecilia intervened, sitting in her armchair, still pale but lucid. "They were sedatives, substances to make me confused, vulnerable. She wanted to control me. She wanted to control you." Ethan looked at his mother, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his anger faltered. "Mom, son, I know it hurts. I know you loved her. But she didn't love you. She loved what you had, and she was willing to get me out of the way to get it." The words broke something inside Ethan. He fell to his knees, his hands covering his face, and he wept. He wept for the lost illusion, for the love that was never real, for the loneliness that had made him so vulnerable. Cecilia rose with difficulty and hugged her son. "It's okay, my love. You're safe now. We're safe." But when Ethan looked up, his eyes landed on Helen. And there was something in that look that chilled her. It wasn't gratitude, it was resentment. "You should have told me from the beginning," he said. "You should have trusted me. I tried, Mr. Campbell. You wouldn't listen. Because you didn't have proof. If you had come to me with proof, with concrete evidence, I would have listened. And given her time to complete her plan, for your mother to end up isolated, drugged, maybe worse." Ethan didn't answer. He just stood up, wiped his tears, and left the room. That night, Cecilia called Helen to her room. "My son is hurt," she said. "Not with you, but with himself for being so blind. He'll need time." "I understand, Mrs. Campbell, but I will not forget what you did. You risked your job, your safety to save me. Few people would do that. I couldn't let her harm you." Cecilia smiled, taking Helen's hand. "For that, I want to make you an offer. I want you to be the house manager, not just an employee, but someone with authority, with a voice, someone we can trust completely." Helen felt tears well up in her eyes. I don't know what to say." "Say yes, please. After everything that's happened, I need someone I know is on my side. On our side." "Yes," Helen whispered. "Yes, I accept." Cecilia's recovery took weeks. The doctors said she was lucky. If the exposure to the sedatives had continued any longer, the damage could have been permanent. But slowly, as the days passed, her strength returned, her lucidity returned, and with it, a renewed determination. Ethan, for his part, threw himself into his work. He spent entire days at the office, came home late, spoke little. Helen would sometimes see him looking at the spot where Larissa used to sit, an expression of loss and confusion on his face. She wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, but she knew some wounds need time to heal. Ryan was captured 2 weeks later, trying to cross the border into Mexico. During his interrogation, he confessed everything: how he had met Larissa on an online forum about scams, how she had recruited him with promises of easy money, how they had meticulously planned everything, from the chance meeting at the charity event to Ethan's trip to Germany. He also revealed the other cases. In Stamford, an 80-year-old widow had left her entire fortune to a caregiver who appeared out of nowhere. In Atlantic City, a retired businessman had signed documents transferring properties to a woman he had known for only a few months. In Albany, a woman was found disoriented in a nursing home with no memory of how she got there, while her bank account was empty. Larissa denied everything, of course. She claimed she was innocent, that she was being framed by a resentful employee. But the evidence was irrefutable. The video, the documents, the fake IDs, Ryan's testimony. It all fit together perfectly. The trial took place 6 months later. Helen was there, sitting next to Cecilia, when the judge read the verdict. 15 years in prison for attempted assault, fraud, identity theft, and criminal conspiracy. Ryan received 10 years. As they led a handcuffed Larissa out of the courtroom, she stopped beside Helen. For a brief moment, their eyes met. "You should have stayed in your place," Larissa whispered. "You should have stayed in the shadows where you belong. And you should have picked another family to destroy," Helen replied calmly, "because in this one, we take care of each other." Larissa smirked, a bitter, defeated expression before being led away. Outside on the courthouse steps, reporters surrounded Cecilia and Helen. The story had made headlines in major newspapers: the housekeeper who saved an entire family from an elaborate scam, the simple woman who had the courage to face dangerous criminals to protect those she loved. "How do you feel now that it's all over?" a reporter asked, holding a microphone out to Helen. She looked at the cameras, at the crowd, at Cecilia by her side, and said, "I feel that justice has been served, and that sometimes the most unlikely people are capable of the most courageous acts. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just did what was right." "But it was extraordinary," Cecilia said, putting an arm around Helen's shoulders. "You were extraordinary, and you will always be part of this family." When they returned home that afternoon, Ethan was waiting in the living room. He stood up as they entered, and for the first time in months, there was something different in his eyes. Not resentment, not anger, but respect. "Helen," he said, stepping forward, "I owe you an apology, a huge apology. You tried to warn me and I wouldn't listen. You risked everything to save my mother and I treated you with contempt. I was wrong, completely wrong." Helen felt tears burn her eyes. "I understand, Mr. Campbell. You were in love. It's not easy to see the truth when your heart is involved. Still, I should have trusted you. I should have trusted my mother. And because I didn't, I almost lost the most important person in my life." He turned to Cecilia, who was watching the scene with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything." Cecilia hugged her son, and the three of them stood there, united by everything they had been through together. In the months that followed, the Campbell mansion was transformed, not physically, but in spirit. There was laughter again, conversations, dinners where everyone shared stories and plans. Helen took on her role as house manager with grace and efficiency. She reorganized the staff, established new routines, and ensured everything ran perfectly. But more than that, she became a confidant, a friend, someone Ethan and Cecilia knew they could trust completely. Ethan, in turn, began to rebuild his life. Slowly, carefully, he started to smile again. He started to believe that maybe one day he could find true love, but this time he would know how to recognize it. This time he would listen to the advice of those who truly loved him. And Cecilia? Cecilia returned to her orchids, her afternoon teas, her books. But there was something new in her eyes, a light, a gratitude for the second chance life had given her, a renewed appreciation for each day, each moment, each person she loved. One afternoon, as Helen was tidying the sunroom, Cecilia called to her. "Sit with me for a moment," she said, pointing to the chair beside her. Helen sat, and the two were silent for a while, just enjoying the beauty of the flowers around them. "You know," Cecilia said finally, "there's a saying that it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. You, Helen, have a giant fight inside you, a courage that many will never have." "I just did what needed to be done, Mrs. Campbell." "No, you did much more than that. You chose what was right, even when it was hard. Even when you risked everything. That's not just doing what needs to be done, that's heroism." Helen smiled, feeling the warmth of those words. "Thank you, Mrs. Campbell, for trusting me, for giving me the chance to make a difference." "No, dear, thank you. For saving me. For saving my son. For saving this family." And as the sun set over New York City, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the two women sat together, bound by a connection that went far beyond employer and employee. They were friends, they were family, and they were survivors of a storm that had made them stronger than they ever imagined possible. 6 months had passed since the trial, and life in the Campbell mansion had found a new rhythm. The wounds were still healing, but there was a lightness in the air that hadn't existed before. It was as if the entire house had undergone a purification, casting out the shadows and embracing the light that had always been there, just waiting to shine again. Helen woke up at 6 every morning, just as she always had. But now, instead of immediately starting her chores, she had her coffee on the back porch, watching the sun rise over the garden. It was a moment just for her, a small but significant luxury that Cecilia had insisted she take. "You deserve to start your day with beauty, not with work," the matriarch had said. 20 minutes for yourself, that's non-negotiable." And Helen had complied, discovering that those 20 minutes of peace made all the difference in how she faced the rest of her day. As house manager, she now supervised a team of 5, Maria in the kitchen, 2 housekeepers who came 3 times a week, a gardener who tended to the extensive grounds, and a new driver, Mr. Peterson, a 60-year-old man with impeccable references and a kind smile that never hid ulterior motives. Hiring the new driver had been a delicate process. Ethan had been wary, and Helen understood completely. Ryan's betrayal had left deep scars, but she had personally interviewed 5 candidates, checked every reference, spoken with previous employers, and only then presented Mr. Peterson to Ethan. "Trust me," she had said. "I won't let anyone who isn't trustworthy into this house again." And Ethan had trusted her, because after everything, he had learned that Helen had an instinct for people that few possessed. She could see beyond the masks, beyond the pretty words. She knew genuine honesty when she saw it. The household routine now flowed with a harmony that seemed almost musical. Each person knew their role, each task was performed with care and attention. But more importantly, there was mutual respect. Helen had established a clear rule from the start. In that house, everyone was treated with dignity. It didn't matter if you were the owner or the cleaner. Everyone deserved respect. Ethan had changed too. The man who had returned from Germany, broken and suspicious, had slowly transformed into someone more whole, more aware. He began to participate more in the life of the house, not just as a distant resident, but as an active part of the family. Sometimes on Saturday mornings, he would come down to the kitchen and make breakfast for his mother and Helen. They were simple moments, but filled with meaning. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh squeezed orange juice, and conversation. Lots of conversation. "I never realized," he said one morning, as he flipped the eggs in the pan, "how much time I wasted being blind to what really mattered. I had everything around me. This house, my mother, people who genuinely cared about me. But I was focused on filling a void that I had created myself." "The void wasn't your fault, Mr. Campbell," Helen replied, sitting at the table. "Loneliness is a real thing, and people like Larissa know how to spot it and use it to their advantage. Still, I should have been smarter, more observant." Cecilia, who entered the kitchen at that moment, walked over to her son and touched his shoulder. "Son, stop punishing yourself. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do afterward. And you chose to learn, to grow, to become better. That's all that matters." Ethan turned and hugged his mother, and Helen felt her heart ache with the beauty of that moment. This was the family she had fought to save. and it was worth every second of fear, every risk she had taken. The story of what had happened in the Campbell mansion didn't stay within those walls. The national media covered the case extensively. The woman who scammed wealthy families, the courageous housekeeper who exposed the scheme, the family that was nearly destroyed but emerged stronger. Helen gave a few interviews, always reluctantly, always modestly. She didn't like the spotlight, didn't like being treated as a hero. To her, she had simply done what any decent person would do. But people saw it differently. They saw courage, they saw integrity, they saw someone who, despite having no power or wealth, chose to fight for what was right. One interview was particularly memorable. It was for a morning television show, and Helen was nervous, her hands sweating as she waited backstage. "You'll do great," said Cecilia, who had accompanied her. "Just be yourself. Tell the truth. People will connect with that." And that's what Helen did. Sitting on the studio couch with the bright lights shining and the host smiling encouragingly, she told her story. She spoke of Cecilia's initial suspicions, of the conversations she had overheard, of the fear she had felt, of the decision to act even at the risk of losing everything. "What gave you the courage to keep going?" the host asked. "Even when your employer didn't believe you, even when you were threatened?" Helen thought for a moment before answering. "It was Mrs. Campbell. Seeing her every day, knowing she was being harmed, that someone was taking away her lucidity, her strength. It was unbearable. I couldn't just stand by, not when I had the chance to do something, even if that something cost me my job, my safety. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try." The show's phone lines lit up with calls from emotional viewers, people sharing their own stories of courage, of difficult decisions, of choosing what was right even when it was risky. After that show, Helen received dozens of invitations to speak at companies about ethics and courage, to participate in awareness campaigns about scams targeting the elderly, to become a spokesperson for social causes. She declined most, but accepted a few, mainly those related to protecting the elderly. She became a volunteer at an organization that educated families on how to identify scammers. She shared her story countless times, always with the hope that it could prevent other families from going through what the Campbells had. Ethan watched it all with a mixture of pride and admiration. One evening, after a quiet dinner, he called Helen into his office. "I want to show you something," he said, opening a desk drawer. It was a document. Helen took it and read, her eyes widening as she understood what she was seeing. "Mr. Campbell, this is a partnership in the company," Ethan finished. 5%. It's not a lot, but it will ensure you have a substantial income for the rest of your life. Dividends, profit sharing, everything. "But I can't accept this. It's too much. You're not just anything," Ethan interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "You saved my mother. You saved my company. You saved my life. 5% is the least I can do, and it's non-negotiable. It's already been officially filed." Helen felt. Tears streamed down her face. She didn't know what to say, how to express the gratitude she felt. "Thank you," was all she could manage to whisper. "Thank you for trusting me. You're the one who deserves our trust. You always have." But perhaps the biggest change happened in Cecilia. The matriarch, who had spent months under the influence of sedatives, who had nearly lost her autonomy, her dignity, her life, had returned with a renewed strength. She became an activist, using her position and influence to promote change. She worked with lawmakers to create stricter laws protecting the elderly. She donated part of her fortune to organizations that investigated financial scams. She became a mentor to other seniors, teaching them to recognize signs of abuse and manipulation. "I wasted so much time just being decorative," she told Helen one afternoon, as they reviewed documents for one of the campaigns she supported. "Thinking my role in life was to take care of the house, the orchids, to be the perfect mother. But now I know I can be more, that I must be more." "You were always more, Mrs. Campbell. You were always wise, strong, observant. You were the one who first suspected Larissa. You were the one who taught me to watch, to trust my instincts." Cecilia smiled, taking Helen's hand. "And you were the one who had the courage to act. We make a good team, you and I." The seasons passed. Spring brought new flowers to the garden. Summer filled the house with light and warmth. Fall painted the trees gold and red. And winter brought a quiet, cozy peace. On one of those cold January days, Ethan came home early from work. He found Helen in the library, organizing books that had been donated for a literacy campaign. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked. "Of course, Mr. Campbell, have a seat." Ethan sat, and there was something different in his expression. Nervousness, perhaps, or anticipation. "I've met someone," he said finally. "A woman, Paula. She's an architect. She restores historic buildings. We met at a conference on cultural preservation." Helen smiled. "That's wonderful, Mr. Campbell." "It is. And this time, I'm doing things differently. Slowly. Carefully. And, if you don't mind, I'd like you to meet her. I want your opinion. I want you to tell me if you see anything I might be missing." "It would be an honor," Helen replied, touched that Ethan valued her opinion so much. Paula came to dinner the following week. She was a woman of 40 with curly hair tied back in a casual ponytail, red-framed glasses, and a genuine smile. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, nothing flashy, nothing calculated. During dinner, she spoke about her work with passion, about how every old building had a story to tell, how she loved discovering architectural details hidden under layers of bad renovations, how her greatest pleasure was restoring a building to its original glory. "And family?" Cecilia asked at one point. "Do you have family in New York?" "I do. My parents live in Brooklyn. My dad is a retired professor. My mom is a dentist. I have a younger brother who's a musician. We're very close. We have lunch together every Sunday." "How lovely," Cecilia said, and Helen noted the approval in her eyes. After Paula left, Ethan turned to Helen and Cecilia, anxious. "So? What did you think?" Cecilia answered first. "She's genuine. I didn't see any sign of falsehood, no hidden agenda. She looks at you as if she sees you. Ethan, not your money or status, that's rare and precious." Ethan turned to Helen. "And you?" Helen smiled. "I agree with Mrs. Campbell. Paula is real. The way she talked about her family with so much affection, the passion for her work, the way she looks at you with respect, with genuine interest, I think she could be special." Ethan let out a sigh of relief. "Thank you. Thank you for being honest with me." The following months were a time of discovery for Ethan. He and Paula saw each other regularly, always in public places, always taking their time. No rush, no pressure. He introduced her to his friends, his colleagues. She took him to meet her parents, and when finally, 8 months later, Ethan announced that he was thinking of asking Paula to marry him, no one was surprised or worried. Because this time it was different, it was real. The proposal happened at home in the garden Cecilia loved so much. Ethan organized a small gathering, just family. Paula, her parents, her brother, Cecilia, Helen, and a few close friends. When he knelt and opened the little box with the ring, tears streamed down Paula's face before he even finished speaking. "Paula, you brought light back into my life. You taught me that true love is built slowly, with trust, with respect, with friendship. Will you build a life with me?" "Yes," she whispered, her smile lighting up her face. "Yes, I will." Everyone clapped, hugged, cried with joy. And when Helen looked at Cecilia, she saw the peace in her eyes, the certainty that this time her son was safe. He was happy. He was truly loved. The wedding took place 6 months later, in an intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden. Just 40 guests, people who truly mattered. No ostentation, no extravagance, just love, celebrated with simplicity and beauty. Paula chose a simple white lace dress. Ethan wore a light-colored suit. Cecilia, radiant in a pale blue dress, walked her son down the aisle to the makeshift altar under the trees. And Helen? Helen was asked to be the maid of honor. She, who had started as an invisible employee, was now an essential part of that family. In the middle of the ceremony, Ethan did something unexpected. He stopped the officiant and turned to Helen. "Before we continue, I need to say something. Helen. Miller, you saved my life in more ways than I can count. You saved my mother. You taught me what really matters. You showed me that trust is earned with actions, not words. Without you, I wouldn't be here today. Paula wouldn't be here. none of this would be possible. So thank you, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. He stepped down from the altar and hugged Helen, who was crying uncontrollably. It was nothing, she managed to whisper. It was everything, Ethan corrected. It was absolutely everything. The party that followed was joyful, full of laughter and dancing and celebration. And when night fell and the stars appeared in the New York sky, Helen found herself alone for a moment on the porch, watching the party through the windows. Cecilia appeared beside her, 2 glasses of champagne in her hands. She handed one to Helen. A toast, the matriarch said, to courage, to loyalty, to justice, and to the family we choose, not just the one we're born into. They toasted, the delicate clinking of crystal echoing in the quiet night. You know, Cecilia said after a moment, a year ago I was in a hospital bed, not knowing if I would survive, not knowing if I would see my son get married, not knowing if I would get to see justice served. And now look, I'm here, strong, alive, watching my son, happy, truly happy, for the first time in years. And it's all because you had the courage to do what was right. It wasn't just me, Mrs. Campbell. You fought too. You were strong too. We were strong together. And that made all the difference. They stood in silence for a while, just watching the stars and listening to the soft music coming from inside the house. What will you do now? Cecilia asked. With your new position, with the dividends from the company, you have financial security. You can do anything. Helen thought for a moment. I'll stay here, taking care of this house, of this family, because this is my place, this is where I belong. Cecilia smiled, her eyes shining with tears. How lucky for us then, because you're exactly who we need. The following years brought more changes, all of them positive. Ethan and Paula had twins, a boy and a girl, who filled the mansion with childish laughter and energy. Cecilia, now a grandmother, flourished in her new role, telling stories, teaching, loving. Helen became not just a house manager, but a fundamental part of the family. Aunt Helen, the children called her, and she loved every second of it. She continued her advocacy work on scams targeting the elderly, now with even more fervor. Her testimony helped pass new laws. Her speeches inspired dozens of others to speak out about their own experiences. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the house was silent and everyone was asleep, Helen would go out to the porch and look at the stars. She would think about the long road she had traveled, from that afternoon in the garden when she first heard the words that changed everything, to now, surrounded by love, respect, and purpose. She thought of Larissa, serving her time in prison. She sometimes wondered if the woman felt any remorse, any regret. Probably not. People like her rarely did. But Helen had chosen not to let bitterness or anger take hold of her. She had chosen, instead, to focus on the good that had come from it all, on the lives she had been able to touch, on the changes she had helped create. One night, almost 3 years after Ethan's wedding, Helen was on the porch when she heard footsteps behind her. It was Cecilia, now 79, still elegant, still strong. Can't sleep? Cecilia asked, sitting beside her. Just thinking, Helen replied, about everything that's happened, how things have changed. For the better, Cecilia said. Everything has changed for the better. Yes, definitely for the better. Cecilia took Helen's hand, squeezing it affectionately. You know I think of you as a daughter, don't you? Not just an employee, not just a friend. A daughter. Helen felt her heart tighten. I think of you as family too, Mrs. Campbell. This house, Mr. Campbell, the children, all of this is my family, my real family. Then say it, not Mrs. Campbell, just Cecilia, or better yet, Mom. Helen looked at the matriarch, saw the genuine love in her eyes and whispered, Mom. And the two of them sat there, mother and daughter, not by blood but by choice, watching the night wrap the city in its gentle embrace. Helen Miller's story spread. It became a symbol of courage, integrity, and loyalty. Books were written about the case, documentaries were produced. But for her, none of that mattered as much as the simple moments. Breakfast with the family, bedtime stories for the children, afternoon tea with Cecilia, deep conversations with Ethan. She had learned that heroism isn't found in grand gestures or public recognition. It's in the daily choices, in the decision to do what's right, even when it's hard, in the courage to speak up when it would be easier to stay silent, in the love that is built through consistent actions, not empty words. And as the world kept spinning outside with all its complexities and challenges, inside, the Campbell mansion, there was peace, there was love, there was family. Helen Miller, the invisible housekeeper who became a hero, who saved a family and changed laws, who inspired thousands, found her place in the world. Not through wealth or fame, but through something far more valuable: purpose, connection, and unconditional love. And every night, before she went to sleep, she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for having had the courage to act, for having trusted her instincts, for having chosen to fight for what was right no matter the cost, because in the end, that's what made all the difference. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen, Cecilia, and Ethan has touched your heart. If you were moved by the courage of this extraordinary woman, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul. We'll see you in the next episode.